this is Randall and welcome to a special painting video on the Imperial Minis channel. I've been painting a lot of House Baratheon units lately for the A Song of Ice and Fire tabletop miniatures game, and I've been giving these units all a very battered and beleaguered Grimdark look. In my mind, these troops represent the forces of Stannis Baratheon late in his campaign in the books, where they're just desperately fighting to uphold his diminishing claim to the throne and are in total survival mode. They're not overly concerned with looking clean and neat, and the demands of a campaign in constant motion make spotless armor and bright, clean clothes a luxury that Stannis' army simply does not have. With this in mind, I've applied some of the principles of the Grimdark painting style to my Baratheon army. In this video, we'll walk through my painting process from start to finish for a unit of Foot Knights known in this game as the Kingsmen. The Kingsmen have, in my opinion, some of the coolest sculpts in the game, and luckily enough, received quite a big buff in the last game patch, so they're seeing a welcome resurgence in popularity in Stannis loyalty Baratheon armies. Before we get started, these are the main painting products that I used during this video. In this video, I filmed myself painting one of the 12 minis that comes in this unit of Kingsmen. I painted the remaining units off camera. At the end of the video, you'll be able to see the entire unit in all of its bleak, desaturated glory, so stay tuned for that. I'd love to know what you think of this paint scheme and especially of this video format, as it's a new one for the channel. If you enjoy the video, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. Now let's get on with the painting. Alright, so now we're looking at the primed mini. I have kind of a two-step priming process for this type of painting. I start off with a Vallejo matte black, or just Vallejo, I guess it's just black primer as my first coat. And then on top of that, I use Pro Roll black brown. I think this black brown gives a little bit more of a realistic kind of dark metal look. But I start off with the Vallejo black because I find the Pro Roll doesn't adhere quite as well. So I've had situations where I've accidentally scratched it off. Here I'm also showing what kind of texture paste I use. I use the Vallejo texture paste and then some coarse basing texture from Pro Roll just to add some variety to the texture of the basing. So now we're going to move on to the dry brushing itself. So I start off, of course, using just like an old beat up, like craft store brush, and I use Citadel's Necron Compound. And the one I use here is actually an older bottle of it that's all kind of chunky and gross, but I've actually found that I like the effect that the old chunky gross bottle gives better than a fresh one. I'll use the fresh one a little bit later, but right now for the purposes of this first step, you see I'm using this old one that has all these chunks, so I'm really just getting all these little chunks and crushing them down on my dry brushing palette there. Ideally you'll use a better, not spoiled version of Necron Compound, but for whatever reason I've had kind of good luck with this kind of old one. So here I go, just kind of hitting the model all over. You want to take off most of the dry brush paint off of your paintbrush before you use it, so it doesn't go on too heavy. And here you see kind of the final product after the first pass, first kind of layer of dry brushing. And we'll look at the whole unit here real quick, and this is what the unit is going to look like before I hit it with the brown enamel wash. So next we're going to move on to the brown enamel wash. Alright, now the brown enamel wash step, this is one of the most important steps of this to achieve this kind of grimdark look. Right here you see me holding up two enamel washes, a brown wash and a dark wash. For this unit I mostly just used the brown one. I think for this demonstration I'm showing kind of a mixture of brown and dark, mostly brown but a little bit of dark. But I found a better effect is just straight up using the brown enamel wash. So I have it over there on my palette, and I'm being a little bit careful here. The main thing you want to avoid is getting the brown wash on the chainmail, because while the plate armor might kind of get some dirt and grime and stuff stuck on it, I'm thinking that the chainmail wouldn't get as rusty and dirty because the chainmail is kind of in constant motion, and also for it to be effective in allowing the knight to move, he's going to want to keep it somewhat lubricated and somewhat cleaned. So Here you can see what the effect looks like when it's done. You can see I wasn't careful enough really to keep it out of the chainmail. So I'm going to go in later on and fix that. But for now, this is what it looks like once the enamel wash is dried. And in some videos you'll see people will remove the enamel wash immediately after applying it or shortly after applying it. I always let it dry completely because I think it gives a better effect. So here you see what I'm going to use to remove the enamel wash. I use this odorless terpenoid, also known as mineral spirits. I got these ones just at the local craft store. And then you use Q-tips or cotton buds, as they are known elsewhere. And I'll put a little bit of the mineral spirits onto the cotton bud and then wipe most of it off. You don't want it to be sopping wet because then when you go through and do this process here, it's going to just basically turn that enamel wash back into a wash. So you want it to be mostly removed. And then you see the motion I'm using here. It's not a scrubbing motion, it's really a spinning motion. Because I found if you scrub, you're at risk of actually removing the silver paint. So the spinning motion kind of achieves two things. It is softer and gentler on the paint job underneath, and it also helps to kind of work that enamel wash into the joints and into the crevices rather than just kind of scrub it off. So whenever possible, I like to use this little kind of spinning motion. I think it gives a better effect than just scrubbing with the Q-tip. Then here's what it looks like after taking off the enamel wash. You see there's still a good amount left, but most of the raised areas, it's been removed from most of the raised areas. And then another important step after I do this and after the miniature is dried again from the mineral spirits, which is pretty quickly, I'll take a big makeup brush, kind of a brush, and I'll give it a really quick kind of light dusting. This isn't to do anything to the paint. This is just to kind of remove any little spare fibers from the Q-tip. And here's the finished unit after this step. Alright, so now what we're going to do is we're going to go back in and clean up those spots where I maybe was a little too messy with the enamel wash. So we're going to go back again with the black-brown primer, and on any of the chainmail where I was a little bit too sloppy, I'm going to go back in and repaint those with this black-brown primer. Because, like I mentioned before, I don't want the chainmail to look all rusty and dirty. I just want the plate armor to look kind of dingy and dirty. The chainmail, I want it to look relatively clean-ish, or at least, if not clean, then not dirty and rusty. So once you do that, you're going to let that dry, and then you're going to go back with the Necron compound. And this time I'm using the newer bottle of Necron compound. And you don't have to change bottles or have an old one and a new one. I just decided I didn't want to bother with the granular chunks of the old one, so I'm just using the new one now. And you're going to go back through and just reapply this Necron compound over the enameled version of the Mini. So the enamel kind of dulls the metallic effect a little bit wherever, even when you've removed it, it leaves kind of a little bit of a filter over it. So this is just to kind of re-brighten the highlights, the highest kind of points of the armor. So it leaves all the enamel in the nooks and crannies and crevices, but it really just helps to add a little bit more shine and highlight to the edges and the highlighted areas. So now we'll look at the whole unit real quick and see what it looks like after applying this step. And then next we're going to move on to painting the tabard. Alright, so painting the tabard, these colors here are the main colors that I use to paint the tabards. You'll notice there's no real kind of kapow bright oranges. The brightest one is the highest of the highlights there on the left. I try to make my yellows look somewhat desaturated to kind of fit the sort of grimdark theme here. So I start off with a base coat of Vallejo chocolate brown, then scale color Iroko, and then scale color Sahara yellow, and then scale color Tenere, I think that's how you pronounce it, yellow. That's the highest of the highlights. So here's an example of a Lightbringer that I painted. That was the previous unit that I painted in this paint scheme. And then here's Stannis Baratheon. So just to kind of show what the yellow will eventually look like when it's all done. It's still bright, but not totally super vibrant. And that's the goal here. So now I'm showing the chocolate brown, which is going to be the base coat for the tabard, and you'll see that I mix a little bit of glaze medium into it. Glaze medium I typically use it as a retarder, so it'll lengthen the working time of the paint. But in this case, what I'm using the glaze medium for more than that is that it will allow me to correct mistakes on the spot. So if I paint over onto the armor accidentally, right now that's going to be a very important thing to catch early on, because we're not going to go back and fix the armor because we've already completed our treatment of the armor. So if I accidentally paint over right now, I'm going to want to go back in right away with a wet brush and remove any overpainting. So that's why the glaze medium is there at this step. And just going through, continuing to paint it. Just paint the entire tabard. Nothing too special here. Making sure to be pretty careful and clean it up whenever I make a mistake. So here are all the minis with the tabards base coated. Moving on to our first highlight, I'm doing a mix of chocolate brown and Iroko, and this is probably one of the more time-consuming steps of the tabard process because I'm going to paint probably 90% over the chocolate brown. So this is going to be kind of the first highlight, the lowest highlight, so it's going to be covering almost the entire tabard. So it's going to take a little bit of time to do this part, but it is a very important step because it does move you. It's that kind of bridge between the darkest base color of that chocolate brown and the first of the yellow kind of colors. So it kind of provides a bridge between that brown and the yellows. So it is an important step, so you don't just have quite as stark of a shift between the chocolate brown and the yellows. But it does take some time, so you don't have to be super neat because it is such a kind of gradual, gentle highlight from the brown. But you do need to pay attention to where you're applying it. So the first real highlight here is pure Iroko, straight from the bottle. Going forward here, I am adding glaze medium, a little bit of glaze medium to each of these highlights. That is to both increase the working time of the paint in the on my palette, because you see I do use a dry palette. I don't use a wet palette. It's not because I have any issue with wet palettes. It's just that my painting sessions are generally so short that it doesn't make sense for me to use a wet palette and leave a bunch of paint on there when I'm only painting for 30 minutes to an hour at a time. So yeah, I put the glaze medium in there. It keeps the paint active for longer and also allows me to blend a lot easier on the fly. So I don't really do a lot of wet blending. I'll just generally kind of feather it. So if it goes on a little too thick, I'll just get a brush with a little bit of water and just kind of feather it out on the model, on the spot. Makes things go a little faster, and it's good enough for me. I'm not looking for perfection here, so the feathering always works well for me. This step takes some time also. As you see, the Iroko, especially having been diluted slightly with the glaze medium, it goes on pretty light. So I end up putting on a couple of layers of Iroko here. So by the time I finish going through the entire mini with one layer, generally the first layer has dried, and I'll go back over and add a second layer, and hopefully by the end it will be opaque enough to be highlighted. So here's the final mini after the Iroko is applied. You can see it's still even a little wet because of the glaze medium, and I'll let that fully dry before going on to the next step. And the next step is to go with Sahara Yellow, and again I'm going to add a little bit of glaze medium to it. Sahara Yellow is a little bit of a brighter yellow, but again, since it has the glaze medium, it's going to go on a little bit thin, so you really don't want to glop it on. You want to do kind of thin applications. So this process will be pretty much the same as the Iroko, except you'll be covering slightly less of the mini than as you did before. which is the way highlights are going to work. You know, if you cover the exact same amount of area each time, then there really was no point of in adding subsequent or gradual highlights. So here you're going to cover a little bit less each time, so hopefully as each highlight goes on, it'll be a little bit quicker for you because you're not covering quite as much ground. And just like the Iroko, it's going to take a couple of layers to really get the effect. But since you're doing a couple of layers, you really have the opportunity then to make even more of a gradual highlights. And here's the mini with the Sahara Yellow completed. You see it is looking a bit more yellow now. And you can definitely see those shadows and that base coat still under there. So here's a highlight. This is Sahara Yellow mixed with the Tenere Yellow, and again, forgive me if that's not the proper pronunciation. And here, I'm really making a conscious effort here to only highlight those areas that I think are, you know, kind of getting hit by that, like zenithal light source, really. So, you know, I'm definitely covering much less of the mini than I did with the previous highlight layers. I'm being very aware, trying to be very aware of how much I highlight. You don't want to over highlight, you don't want to under highlight. So I'm really just trying to highlight those areas that make sense, so that by the end of this step, hopefully those highlights are going to really start to kind of pop, and you'll see a lot more kind of complexity, hopefully, to the highlights. And this highlight will either be the last highlight or second to last. You know, I'm not sure at this point of the painting process whether I'm going to go back and do a pure Tenere Yellow or leave it at this. I think I will end up just leaving it at this because I don't want the miniatures to be too bright. So I think after this highlight layer is over, they look sufficiently desaturated to me, but still selling the yellow that I was looking for. And during this process, I generally don't want to make every unit and every miniature in the unit totally uniform. So later on, you'll see that there are several minis in the unit that have black tabards, and a couple of them that have white tabards. So it just kind of breaks up the uniformity just a little bit, and I always like doing that. So here's the finished mini, and next we're going to move on to something else. So with the completion of the tabard, that and the metal are really the two kind of secret sauce elements of this whole look. So now I'm really just kind of getting into the details. So what I'm showing now is I'm going to use Vallejo Dark Rust and then scale color, orange leather, and Iroko to paint some of the leather straps. So I go through with the dark leather, or the dark rust rather, and go through and hit all the straps that I can. I will go in later and do some other straps and the belt in a slightly different leather. So here you see I use Vallejo red leather, which is one of my absolute favorite paint colors. And I use this to highlight some of the straps on the cuirass, and I'll also use that as a highlight color on the belt. So I try to not make all of the leather on my minis the exact same color. I try to add a little bit of variety, and I can never not paint a mini with some red leather because, like I said, it's my absolute favorite color. So I go through and use some of that here. And then next up, we're going to do this other little detail, which is the Baratheon stag on the tabard. This one's pretty easy. You just go through with I used AK black, but I mean you can use any flat black. And here you just want to be really careful not to paint over that yellow, because black can be kind of hard to remove totally, and you can pretty quickly have a mess on your hands. So after you get the black down, I'm just going to add some really quick highlights to it. So I just get AK Graphite, which is kind of a neutral gray, and I just kind of tap a few of the little spots on the stag that would be natural highlights. So, you know, the little flank there, the antlers, the head, just kind of tap them a little bit to give the impression of a highlight. And now we move on to the sword. So the sword I will base coat in steel and then finish off with chrome. And all these metal colors I'm using are Vallejo metallic colors. So like I said, the sword I base coated in steel, and then I highlighted the top of it in chrome, which gives it a real nice high shiny metal look. You know, even though the armor is all beat up, I want their weapons to be like pristine, because that's what is most important to them. So now what I'm showing is I'm going to use Vallejo Metal Color Dark Aluminum. Now this is going to be kind of the final highlight on the armor. So I go through here and use this to pick out any raised areas, any edges of armor, some flat areas, and this will provide a really nice little shine. So even more than the Necron compound, this dark aluminum metal color highlight will really give a little bit of pop to the armor. So it'll still look beat up, it'll still look grungy, but it's only natural that areas that get scuffed against or rubbed against often, or that, you know, have kind of metal on metal contact, you're going to see some really high shine on those areas. So this also helps to keep the model from just kind of looking like a bland mess. So you'll see me picking out some areas that I want to stand out. So here you got the visor on the helmet. I made a little mistake and got some brown on the top of the helmet, so you'll see me go and fix that. Also kind of just the top little crest of the helmet, the pointy top part of the helmet, I get that. Really any part that's kind of exposed to like a zenithal light from the top, you want to pick out to give a little bit of extra attention to. And this part's always fun. This process here is always fun because you're kind of getting that final step on the model, that most important step to really see what the armor is going to look like when it's totally done. And here it is. This is what the Mini looks like after this step, and it's pretty much done at this point, barring a few little details. So here's the final product. This is the unit, the entire unit of 12 miniatures, and I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. I have, like I said before, I have a few colors of tabards here. I have the yellow, I have a few guys with black tabards, and then a couple guys with white tabards, just to kind of break up the uniformity a little bit. And then I have them on a, you know, to kind of further push the kind of Grimdark kind of vibe here. I have these guys on this sort of ashen wasteland, kind of burned forest look, which I made another video in the past where I described how I made these bases. So I'll try to put a link to that video up on the corner here. But here they are. There's the bannerman there. I used the same process to paint the flag as I did to paint the tabard. Here's a close-up of the guys. But yeah, I didn't go into any details really on how to paint the pommel of the sword or any of these other kind of small details, because they're all pretty self-explanatory. Really just use any process you're comfortable with for painting those things. And really, whenever I paint miniatures, I always try to pick out a couple of things to do decently, because most people's attention will be drawn to those, and then everything else they'll kind of just mentally map over in their mind as being acceptable enough, and they kind of overlook them. So for me on this model, I wanted to do the tabards well, and I wanted to do the metal armor well. So I think for most people, when they look at these miniatures, that's primarily what they see. They're not paying close attention to the shading on the grip of the swords or the detail on the pommels of the swords. They're just primarily reacting to I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but reacting to the tabards and the armor and maybe the basing. And they're just kind of in their mind, it kind of goes together into, you know, I hope, decently painted unit. So that just about does it for this video. If you found this video useful, please be sure to let me know in the comments so I can make other videos like this in the future. And be sure to subscribe so you'll have a better chance of seeing new videos pop up when they're released. Before we close, I'd like to say a special thanks to Dennis from the Hits and Crits channel for urging goading and strongly recommending for months that I make a video like this. Until next time, this is Randall, signing off.